Welcome back to the class, everyone. As many of you have heard and now know, we have Kyrotech drops for free hitting the Cantina nodes for the next 5 or so days, assuming that you have Marin 7 stars. And while this is great and I love free stuff, what I love more is knowing whether or not we can take advantage of this to get even more value. So to do that, we're going to pull up our spreadsheet here in a second and talk about what we're trying to get out of this, and rather what we're trying to beat in the drop rates we need to get to know whether or not we go and do the 200 crystal refreshes for Cantina if it's a good value. So overall, this is the event that's happening for those of you who have not heard. It is going to be hitting, this should be today, 4/12. I'm recording this the night before, rather late, through 4/17. And this is a little bit confusing because it's not spelled out for us here, but if you do not have Marin at 7 stars, you will get bonus drops for her on all the Cantina nodes scaled to energy. If you already have her at 7 stars, you will be getting the MK7 Kyrotech prod prototype, which is great because that's the Kyrotech that is needed more for whatever reason. And really, even if it was the one that's needed more, having more Kyrotech all the time is very good for about 95% of the player base. So now with that all being said, we need to work with some assumptions overall when looking at this math. So what is already going to be assumed is that most people that can or want to get good value out of their Cantina energy, farming signal data or whatever else is, are consistently going to be using the 100 crystal refreshes. What we're trying to figure out here is, do we not only want to go with the 100s, but also beyond with the 200s in order to get more Kyrotech at a better value? So we do have, as I previously mentioned, a spreadsheet pulled up for this. And to dive into this, we need to have these assumptions. So yes, we're assuming that 100 crystal refreshes for Cantina is already being done. We're not really trying to beat that value. We're trying to see if we can add to it. In addition to that, we're also assuming that most people out there are already using their 50 crystal refreshes for normal energy to farm Kyrotech or maybe a character. Either way, it's getting used up because right now, that is the best way to get Kyrotechs. Kyrotech bought through shipments, this is another assumption, is bad value. And that's just pretty simple math that we can do. We will show the math on that later, but that's important for this because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to see if the value for the Kyrotech that we're getting isn't necessarily better than the normal energy drops. We're trying to see if it's better than shipments, because ultimately this stuff we can do every single day and we avoid this. So I want to see if it's better than what we're typically having to avoid. We don't know the drop rates for certain. I have a few screenshots we'll get to at the very end of the video that will kind of help us come to a semi-conclusion, but at the same time, I don't have that from CG, and most of the people right now don't have access to the event, so it's hard to get a large pool of data. And then ultimately what we're working with is the drop rate needs to be high enough to beat out shipments for Kyrotech. So now that we have all those assumptions in place, we can start working on our story problem here. So first off, we know that Kyrotech, when you farm them through normal energy on their nodes, they cost about 19 crystals per Kyrotech, assuming you are using the 50 crystal refreshes. If you're wondering where we get that number from, we didn't make it up. There's been a lot of data collected, and this is from the Planet Coruscant Discord server. It's in fact quite old because this was done when Kyrotechs originally hit. So to give a greater idea of what we're trying to do here, we can check it out on this node. Whenever you farm this, you have a 22% chance for Kyrotech to drop. After we do all the math for the fact that this costs 50 crystals, you get 12 attempts because it's 10 energy at a 22% drop rate. It comes out about to 19 crystals per Kyrotech, and that is currently the best way to get them. We know this because when we compare them over here to you buying them out of shipments, it costs you 28 crystals. The math for that is very simple. It's 700 crystals for 25, 25% of 28 is 700. Now that we know that, we know the value that we need to be beating. We don't necessarily need to be beating 19 crystals because we already know that's good. We need to be beating 28. Now, the other side to this equation with Cantina energy is understanding signal data value. And the reason why is when you go and you do that 200 crystal refresh for Cantina, you're not just getting Kyrotech, you're going to be getting something else in addition to it that was already available on Cantina. And for this, I am going to be using the gray signal data. And the reason why is just because that seems to be the thing that most people will probably need and or could use. And I really don't think the numbers would be all that different if we checked out the other signal datas and even some of the characters. But overall, this is kind of what we're working with right here, where we want to know the overall value we are getting with that. And again, taken from Planet Coruscant, we have some pretty reliable drop rates, 1.37. After you do all the math with everything, it costs you about 10 crystals to get one of those mats when you were doing a normal 100 crystal refresh. If you were getting them through the shipments, they immediately cost 15, a 50% markup. So now that we have all of our numbers in place, we understand the value, we can start picking apart and finding our break-even point for what we need for these bonus drops to be in order for the 200s to be a good deal. So in theory, this is important. 140 crystal refresh for 120 canteen energy would technically be worth it. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because we're not trying to match the deal that we're already getting through the 100 crystal refreshes. We're trying to beat the value that we would be getting if we were trying to get them all out of shipments. And if you're not following, we will just get to a conclusion and you can go with the trust me bro approach. So now that we know that we only could really use 140 crystals, or 140 crystals would already be a good deal, we need to know if the Kyrotech we're getting is worth 60 crystals. So it needs to be at least worth 60, otherwise this is a bad deal and going to the 200s isn't great. So if we follow that theory, we're going to run into a bunch of other conclusions here. Each refresh needs to generate at least 3 Kyrotech. We know that because the value overall on the normal node is about 19, so we'll go up to 20 because we don't need to be as good as that. And we need, and you know, 60 divided by 3, that's where we get this number from. So the drop rate needs to be at least 2.5 per energy to be able to get 3 Kyrotech every single time, because we get 120 energy. That's kind of where this math is all spelled out and then worked in reverse. So let's just say we can get the 2.5%, times that by 120 energy. That means we would get 3 Kyrotechs in total. 3 Kyrotechs plus the 10 signal data is decent value for 200 crystals. So if that didn't really make any sense to you, basically what it means is we need to get at least 2.5% of a drop rate per energy on Cantina for the Kyrotechs to be good enough value in order to go and do the 200 crystal refreshes. Now, I have a very small data pool from actually Zareth and Solobase, the hosts of the Gambit podcast, so shout out to them. Their time zone just hit into the area where they can start getting the drops for Kairos, so we have some I guess not evidence, but some drop rates from them, and kind of can extrapolate a little bit from that. And I have to say, it's really not very good. And obviously, by the time this is posted, everybody will be in this event and will have much better opinions. But right now, for 20 battles, which is, I believe, 320 energy for the stop node, 5 Kyrotech, that's not good. That's not 2.5%. That's a lot closer to 1.5%, which means this is starting to look more like a nice bonus and not something that we can really take advantage of by doubling down on a ton of refreshes. And we continue to scroll down through the amount that are done. It doesn't really get that much better. We go from 5 here to 3 here, which is even worse. And even looking at the really good, this is the best drop rate that I've seen so far out of 20 battles, dropping 7 Kyrotech. This really doesn't really match up to what we need it to be. We really need this to be somewhere upwards of 9 Kyrotech, because 9 Kyrotech over 20 battles costs you roughly 3 refreshes. So, 3 divided by, or 9 divided by 3 or whatever, that would be 3. And yeah, it's not quite there. So again, very small data pool. When we get a larger one, it'll be a lot easier to tell whether or not this is worth it. But right now, it just doesn't look very good at all. And if we're seeing, I guess what we're seeing, if we're seeing high reports for per 20 battles, if we're seeing 9 Kyrotech be very consistent as an average, then this is something where we can take advantage of it and go well into the 200s with. If that is not the case, then just, do your hundreds as normal, or maybe you weren't doing them before and you should be doing them now, and take the free rewards and ultimately just call it a day. So hopefully that made sense. I realized it was quite the math problem to follow, and a lot of it couldn't have been put into numbers. I wanted to write it all out, so it was a little bit simpler for me to follow. Thank you guys for watching. Until the next time, stay awesome.